Bell.
Well done, Speaker.
I call Alfred Ngaro.
Mr. Speaker, it's a privilege to stand and speak on the Social Housing Reform Transaction Mandate Bill in its first reading. Mr. Speaker, I think that the previous speaker probably needs to do a little bit more homework before she actually launches off in her speech, because just a little bit of a history lesson, right? Let's take the housing stock, okay, out in Glen Innes, for instance, and we're out there working Glen Innes. That's right. It's a little bit of silence of the lambs at the moment, because here's the evidence that shows that, right? So let's take, we can talk about the rhetoric, but let's talk about the facts of what actually happened. Out in Glen Innes, there's around about 2,500 state houses. The stock of houses in that area of Glen Innes was some of the worst. And under the Labor government, the previous government, in 9 years, not once did they go out to repair, to maintain, or even to rebuild the housing stock there. No, it's not rubbish. It's not rubbish. It's actual fact. And I tell you this why. You can talk to guys like Pat Sneddon, who are part of the Tamaki Transformation Project. Tamaki Transformation Project, which actually started in 2007, was an idea, came to fruition in 2008, set up under Helen Clark, Tamaki Transformation. At that time, also too, Pat Sneddon was helping to head that project. I, as a community representative, came along and actually gave some commentary around how they could engage with communities. So it's not rubbish, it's actual fact. Started under the Labor government. It was the worst stock of repairs and maintenance of any state housing in the whole of New Zealand. So before that member launches off and talks about the shameful record, it needs to go back, she needs to go back and have a look at her own history, because then she'll see that under the Labor government in 9 years, not once did they actually rebuild that stock. So let's talk about what we are doing here. What we're doing here is this. We're taking the opportunity to be able to engage in the social housing sector. This bill is called the Social Housing Reform Transaction Mandate. So we call it transaction mandate. Let's use another word maybe that even Chris Farfoy may have heard. It's called the devolution of stock, okay? So where did that word come from? Let's use the word devolution. Why? And I know you'll know that because when the Honourable Steve Mahari was Minister of Social Development, he set up a thing called the Blueprint. And I just happened to be part of that committee. And on the Blueprint committee, that's right, Mr. Speaker, I know you're attentively listening to this, Mr. Speaker, but on the Blueprint, the conversation that was there, Mr. Speaker, was the fact of this. Do we trust the state sector, the social sector, to actually provide services that, as a government, we can't provide in regards to extended and extra services that are above and beyond our core services as a government? The answer was yes, we should do that. So the talk of devolution, both in the housing of stock, both in the delivery of service, was talked about way back then. We put together what was called a blueprint plan. And Mr. Speaker, that plan went to Cabinet, and here's the one reason why it didn't go all the way, was because the mandate was not given by Cabinet at that time under the Labor government to trust in the social sector to provide services that they couldn't provide. In other words, they weren't given the mandate. They weren't given the mandate. So there you go. There's a little bit of a history lesson for you. So here's the reason why this bill is a point of difference, Mr. Farfoy. This bill is a point of difference because it simply does this. It says that actually we trust in our social services. We trust in the Housing Foundation with Brian Donnelly. We trust in Habitat for Humanity. We trust in Vision West and Lisa and Woolley. Why? Because they deliver above and beyond what we are able to deliver. These are social services who have actually said to us, actually give us the opportunity to prove that we can do this. So, Mr. Speaker, I think actually what this bill does, it shows that actually not only is it giving the statutory mandate to our ministers, but it's actually forming a relationship of trust in our social services, and especially in the social housing sector, the third sector, to provide these services that are much needed into our communities as well. So, Mr. Speaker, we know what this does first and foremost. There are some issues of concern. I want to raise them because they have come out in some of the speeches, and that's in regards to the relationship with iwi. We know there's been talk about that. Mr. Speaker, it's important that in this bill to note that this bill does not in any way change the first right of refusal rights that iwi may have over some Housing New Zealand properties. We know there's been some concern that's there. It's in the bill. We're concerned that we're keen to make sure that that relationship is maintained. We are working through a thorough process with iwi and Tauranga and in Invercargill to establish what rights and interests they have, and we'll deal with them in good faith. So that's one of the areas, first and foremost, we want to make sure just in case, because on the opposition, and unfortunately even with Mr O'Rourke, there's what we would call the manufacturing of crisis. It's all doom and gloom. It's only about the things that could go wrong, not about the things that could go right, and that's what this government is about. Let's talk about some other issues. This bill does not apply to Crown land if it only relates to land owned by Housing New Zealand. So there was some concern that was raised there. No one's rights under the Public Works Act are changing. The bill simply clarifies that the offer-back provisions of the Public Works Act have never applied to Housing New Zealand property. Mr Speaker, again, we want to sort of dispel the myths of doom and gloom that's coming from the opposition as well. So what are the things that we think are really important in regards to the social housing issue? So what are some of the achievements? Because, while we talk about what the bill is doing, let's look at some of the things that we've achieved so far under the social housing achievements. In June of 2015, this year, social housing register quarterly figures show that the number of people on the register has decreased. That's right, by 1,299 from the June 2014 quarter to 4,541. That's a 22% decrease. I know that members of the public that are listening out there may want to hear these facts and figures. It's a 22% decrease. The Minister of Social Development, MSD, Housing New Zealand and the community housing providers are more intensively working to match people to houses that suit their need. And here's that point of difference. We know that core services by government are what we are responsible for. But where we go above and beyond, and this is that relationship of trust that's formed with social housing providers in which they can provide that. So it's important that we're matching people to houses that suit their need. In fact, maybe even as in the previous speaker, Mr Sepuloni talked about the needs of those who potentially have disabilities. Social housing providers who have a particular niche are able to be able to provide for those specific needs as well. And so with the number of housing offers made and accepted increasing to 1,590 in the June 2015 quarter compared for 1,522 in June 2014 quarter as well. Let's talk about tenancy reviews of those paying market rent and able to sustain private accommodation. Makes more homes available for those who are more in need. Mr Speaker, I've seen this for myself. I've seen that there have been, and it's a really challenging space because it's almost as if the rhetoric that's being championed by the opposition is a state house for life. And I will go there because that's what I hear. It's almost like a state house for life. And I hear that there's that sense of entitlement that they build into the houses and into the homes and even the hearts of people that are in our communities. And what we're saying is this: a state house is a provision for need in the circumstances that a family or an individual may find themselves in. But our belief is this: our belief that we will champion on this side is to help people to a sense of independence so that they can be self-determining in their future for their families as well, Mr Speaker. So that's why we think it's important. So tenancy reviews of those paying market rent are able to sustain private accommodation for over 150 households have moved into private market rents. 11 tenants have purchased their own homes. Now that may not sound like much, Mr O'Rourke, but 11 tenants, we think actually those are 11 lives, 11 families that have been changed by this opportunity as well. We've also paid out around $380,000 in housing support products to 204 people, providing assistance for things like their bond, moving costs and letting fees. Mr Speaker, I look forward to this bill going into the Select Committee. I look forward to the opportunity for submissions to be heard where we can actually hear from others that are out there in the providers. I also acknowledge the championing of our Minister and our ministers that are actually out here, because at the heart of this bill, it is about the devolution of trust. It's about ensuring that actually in the third sector, they have the ability to be able to reach and meet the needs that core government services can't. And we believe, Mr Speaker, this actually is a move that's in the right direction. Mr Speaker, I commend this bill to the Select Committee and to the House.